Welcome everyone, thank you for coming. I'll be chairing. We're going to start off with a short presentation and then we'll take questions after the presentation. So if you could move on to the next slide.
All right. Welcome. I'm Alex Halderman from the University of Michigan. We're here today to present the findings of an independent security evaluation of the Estonian internet voting system that our group has conducted. We set out to study the Estonian iVoting system because Estonia is currently the nation in the world with, by far, the most substantial use of internet voting. In recent elections, 20 to 25% of votes in this country were cast online, and that's by far an outlier on the world scene. This makes the Estonian system very interesting to international election researchers like us because we'd like to find out what works and what doesn't about the system and be able to inform technologists and decision makers around the world who may also be considering voting. Our work began when the four of us here visited Tallinn last October. We came here as observers for the 2013 municipal elections, and we were invited by the city of Tallinn, and our work was, our travel and accommodations were provided by the city government. Since that time, we haven't accepted any funding whatsoever from anybody in Estonia. We haven't accepted any political funding, and we, in fact, haven't been in communication with any parties within the country. We're here today to present our findings. Everyone is finding out at the same time what the results of our study have been. I think we're going to now go through and just briefly introduce ourselves so you know who we are. We don't have name tags. I'm sorry, we didn't have a printer this morning, but we do have names and affiliations.
Maggie?
My name is Margaret McAlpine. I'm an independent advisor on post-election audits, and my past projects include the post-election audit pilot program of California 2011-2012.
Okay.
My name is Harry Hursti. I'm a Finnish independent security researcher. I received 2009 Electronic Frontier Foundation's Pioneer Award for my work in election security studies. And I'm probably most well known about the default hacks and studies on various of electronic technologies and how they evolve.
I'm J. Alex Halderman. I'm a computer science professor from the University of Michigan in the United States. My work is about computer security. I've done studies of electronic voting systems around the world, including all across the United States and as well as in India and Europe. I'm joined also today by two of my PhD students who will introduce themselves as well. And my portion of this work has been funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation.
I'm Jason Kitcat. I lead on electronic voting work for the Open Rights Group, which is a digital rights group based in the UK. I led a team of 25 independent observers for UK elections in 2007 that had e-counting and e-voting, and our findings ended the use of e-voting in the UK. I've also helped do work on the Irish e-voting systems and the Dutch ones, both of which have been withdrawn subsequently. I also am the leader of the City Council in Brighton, so I'm the top politician in my city. I'm here in a capacity with the Open Rights Group. Rick?
I'm Drew Springall, first year PhD student at the University of Michigan, working in computer security and privacy.
I'm Travis Finkenauer. I'm Alex's other PhD student, also first year at Michigan.
Great. Okay. So we're going to just start off with a short video summarising our findings. We're going to take you through them in a little bit more detail and then we'll take questions.
Internet voting sounds like a good idea, fast, modern, convenient. But what are the risks? People often don't think about what could go wrong, but in computer security, this is the question we ask every day.
We don't really have a technology today to do online voting. We can do online banking, we can do e-government, we can do a lot of things. But voting has a unique set of problems.
The number one risk is the fact that online elections really can't be audited effectively because there's no paper trail.
A free and fair election has to have three things. It needs to be secure so that your vote can't be changed. It has to be anonymous so that people can't know how you voted. And it also has to be accurate. That means that your vote has to be correctly stored and counted. And without those things, you don't really have a fair election. Now, the problem with internet voting is it opens up the voting system to the entire world. Anyone with an internet connection can start to attack it and seek to undermine that, often undetectably. And what we've seen over time is that state-level attackers, but also criminal groups, are getting more resources and more sophistication in how they can do online attacks.
Estonia today is the only country that uses internet voting for a very large fraction of their national elections. About 20% of all votes in recent elections have been cast using an internet voting system. In October 2013, we assembled an international team of independent experts in electronic voting and computer security to examine the Estonian system.
We didn't see a polished, fully documented procedural approach of maintaining the back-end systems for the elections.
I was shocked at what I found. Processes and procedures changed on a daily basis. There were attempts to hide errors. CDs were being loaded into this system with no apparent audit trail, just being pulled in and out of backpacks.
After that, we came back to our laboratory and recreated their system using the real source code and the actual client software. And we did a complete security analysis to figure out what kinds of attacks might be possible. There are 2 points in the system that would be particularly appealing for a state-level attacker. In our lab, we simulated attacks against both. The first attack targets the voter's home computer, which typically has poor security and is highly susceptible to malware.
According to some surveys, about 30% of computers worldwide are infected with malware. They're oftentimes part of something called a botnet. Malware that talks to each other, has a whole network. If a machine is part of a botnet, the botnet master can install any malware they want onto that computer. Say an attacker wants to infect many machines, they can go to a bot master and then just rent one out.
Although the online voting process contains several security safeguards, demonstration malware we built defeats them all. Let's watch a sample vote using the real election software. In Estonia, every voter's national ID card contains a secure crypto chip. The voter uses their card together with a secret PIN to log in to the election server. After selecting a candidate, the voter uses the card to digitally sign and cast the ballot. As an added security check, they can use a smartphone app to confirm that the vote was correctly recorded. What you couldn't see is that our malware was running in the background and recording the voter's secret PINs. The next time the voter inserts their ID card, say to access their bank account, the malware uses the PINs to cast a replacement vote and overrides the voter's choices. In this case, changing the vote to Dictator Drew. In a real attack, this process would be completely invisible. For our second simulated attack, we focused on the Estonian voting system's central servers. These servers are blindly trusted to give an honest count, making them an extremely attractive target. Our server attack involves the use of Trojan software on the machine that election officials use to set up all other election servers. This machine could be infected either by an insider installing the Trojan on the machine or by a state-level attacker exploiting a vulnerability. Before the election, unsuspecting officials use the infected machine to burn installation DVDs. The officials check the integrity of the software, but the infection causes the machine to lie and indicate that everything is normal. When officials use the infected DVDs to install software on each election server, it silently installs the vote-stealing software too. Then, when the election is over, votes are decrypted and counted on the counting server. The malicious portion of the software is invisibly triggered. It intercepts each vote as it is decrypted, modifying a fraction of the votes to be in favor of a candidate selected by the attacker. These false votes get recorded and reported in public totals. 10 years ago, cyber warfare might have seemed like science fiction, but in the recent years it's become something you read about almost every week. Chinese attackers breaking into American companies, the NSA spying on people all around the world. Even in Estonia, they suffered online attacks.
So one thing that was surprising is that I was able to implement these attacks successfully in not that much time. You can imagine what someone with more experience and more resources working for the government could do.
The thing that surprised me was the smallest little flaw, that little mistake that somebody made or didn't think to account for could make the whole system vulnerable.
Security is just so difficult because as a defender, you have to get everything right, but the attacker has to find only one flaw. Estonia's internet voting system is actually quite sophisticated, and they've done a lot of things right. It was built by people who had intimate knowledge of security. They made large parts of the system open source. They have documented their procedures. They have video of almost every step of the process. But these things are not enough. The system is still susceptible to being compromised by state-level attackers.
We never thought we would see as many problems and vulnerabilities as we did, and we felt duty-bound to make the public aware of those problems, which we are now doing.
In my assessment, no country in the world today can do internet voting safely, and it's going to be a decade, if ever, before we're able to solve some of the central security problems at stake.
I would recommend Estonia to return to a paper ballot only system.
I think they have an excellent e-government system. I think that they should absolutely continue to develop and improve that, but they should probably take the e-voting part of it offline. And they have a very well-organized paper ballot system and simply revert back to that.
Okay, so we're now just going to go quickly through the findings in a little bit more detail, starting with the operational procedures.
So, a lot of things we observed were very interesting. Both the things we observed when we were election observers seeing the action live, but also to inspect everything what the Election Commission published in their website. This is a good example on the video. They are typing in their own secret PIN codes. And a trained eye of a criminal, you don't need to see very much in order to absolutely capture what the PIN code or password is. So anything looking, whenever you are doing and typing something on a video, even from an unfavorable angle, it's going to be revealed. So this is an example of not maintaining the secrecy of your PIN codes. Next one. Again, this is a situation where the interesting thing you see is in the background, that's the Wi-Fi name and password. So a situation like that, you are revealing for an attacker something which attacker could be using for gaining access to the facility. And the transparency measures which are,
Transparency measures, they've definitely made some good efforts at transparency by making parts of the software open source. However, it's not enough, in part because a lot of the attacks and things would not actually involve the source code. There could be attacks to the servers, for example. And
In this picture we see, for example, the camera is pointed at one laptop, but it's not showing the other one. So while the video would appear to be offering transparency, in fact you're only seeing half of what's actually happening at that moment in time.
So yeah, we've gone through the official videos that they've released frame by frame and just found dozens of examples of problems like this, where there are either security mistakes that are happening or places where there's no way that an observer can see what's going on. And this just reveals a tremendously worrying lack of operational security and professionalism on the part of the election administration. It creates multiple opportunities for an attack to try to compromise the system without being either detectable or being stopped by the procedures that are in place. So the previously.
Yeah, so in that photo there, what happened was at the start of tabulation, hard disks were inserted and they were not recognised by the server, which shouldn't have happened because they were removed from that server a short time beforehand and stored in a safe. So something went wrong. The fact that it's on video for transparency didn't stop the error from happening, and we have no idea why that error happened or how it was fixed. So transparency can lead to a false sense of security.
So the fundamental problem, in my view, with the Estonian system today is that the threat model that was developed under is out of date. 10 years ago, when the system was conceived, we were living in a different world. It might have been okay to build the system in the way it was built. And the issues with the architecture and construction of the system are essentially that the election servers are completely trusted to do the correct thing and produce an honest count. And it's only some very basic procedural controls that are policing them. The voter's home computer, similarly, is mainly trusted to do the right thing, although there's this verification system that has severe limitations that works through the smartphone. But in general, an extreme amount of trust is placed into both components. What happened over the last 10 years is we've seen the rise of state-level attacks, of very sophisticated cyber attacks committed by one government on another. And this is no longer science fiction. This is something we're reading in the paper about virtually every week. China attacking US companies, the NSA attacking, well, really people around the world. The UK attacking European telecoms. These are examples of state governments with very sophisticated cybersecurity and intelligence apparatuses compromising security in foreign states. When we analyzed the Estonian system under this threat model, which we did by building our own copy of the system in our laboratory where it would be legal and safe for us to study it disconnected from the rest of the world, it was astoundingly easy for us, simulating the role of a state-level attacker, to go into the servers and change the election outcome. We're worried that the same thing could happen in real life here in a future election, that a state-level attacker a foreign power, could compromise the server systems by exploiting limitations in the operational procedures like the ones we witnessed and saw on the videos, and could then either change votes, disrupt the voting process, or merely undermine the integrity and the belief in the entire result of the election. Any of these would be a devastating attack on the system, and we were shocked to find how easy and practical this could be in real life.
So we've demonstrated 2 attacks, which you saw in the video, and Travis and Drew will be available to answer questions, to talk about it in more detail, but it's important to show that both ends of the system we have demonstrated viable attacks, and we are aware of many more that we've not had the time to go into in more detail. So if you go forward, our recommendation is, in light of our findings, is that while there are many positive things in the approach taken, such as the transparency and the overall e-government infrastructure of Estonia, the e-voting system should be immediately withdrawn because the risk it poses to the integrity of elections here is too great. And as soon as we've realised that, we have come here to inform the Estonian public before it is used in the European parliamentary elections. So there is an opportunity for the National Election Committee to consider these findings in good time. The full details are on the website listed above, and we are happy to take questions and do further interviews. So, questions, and can you say who you are when you're asking a question? Yeah.
I'm going from the Delphi News portal. I heard you say 2 things. Firstly, you said that there was not enough transparency, and then you said that the transparency is too much because they give out too much information. So, how can you explain?
There's not really a contradiction there. There are a few secrets, like their passwords, that they shouldn't be giving out, obviously. We all know that we shouldn't be typing our passwords where someone else can see. And unfortunately, we see abundant evidence of sloppy practices like that happening during the election procedures, where they're giving out passwords for the system while they're setting up the system and posting that video during the election. So very, very sloppy practices there. On the other hand, the transparency is not enough in the sense that there are key places in the configuration and maintenance of the election where we can't see what's going on. We can't see what happens to the computers used to build the election system before they're brought into the room, for instance. There's no way that they could show that. And what we find in the lab is that if those computers are compromised before being brought into the room, that can affect the outcome at the very end of the election. Or there are places where there are multiple screens where people are typing commands on each of them at the same time, but the camera can only show one. So there's all of this stuff that happens off camera that nobody in the public can see, that no observer can see, that creates an opportunity for, say, a dishonest insider to compromise the system, or for someone to simply make a mistake that would cause the outcome to be wrong.
Another example.
Any of these mistakes could potentially lead to someone like a foreign power compromising the setting up. So.
The videos that they posted to YouTube, in the middle of setting up the servers, they're going to the internet and downloading applications over HTTP in the clear to interact and change and modify their configuration files. That we're concerned that a reasonable advanced attacker could intercept and alter the binary.
Can you show that with a picture of the configuration? Do we have that in the slide deck? Maybe we don't have that on the slide deck. That's on the website. Show you, yeah, show on the website. One of the most egregious things that that we saw, we're bringing up a picture of this now, is the officials show in the published videos the process of creating the voting client software that everyone in the country who votes downloads and runs on their home computers. And so, of course, if this software were tampered with by an attacker before you downloaded it, then it could behave dishonestly and change votes. Well, when we see them building that software, actually creating it and adding the digital signature to it, that's happening on someone's personal computer at the election service. This is not a highly secured, locked down, clean room computer. This is someone's personal computer. You can even see a link to a poker site on the desktop right there. So this is a machine someone was using for their day-to-day web browsing and other activities. It could easily have been infected before it was used to make that voting software. And then that infection could travel to everyone in the country. So this is a mode by which a state-level attacker could easily compromise every voting client, every voter's computer, and B, an example of extremely poor and unprofessional security practice. And there are many, many examples of that we spotted in the videos and during our observation. We were just so alarmed by the lack of professionalism in the election administration process.
Any other questions?
Yes, what do you think about M voting? It's like mobile voting or cell phone voting. This is one question. And the second is that what do you think about this fancy app we have? They say that we can verify our e-vote.
Travis, do you want to?
The mobile voting we didn't analyze. It relies heavily on external servers that we don't have source code for, that we would have had to pretty much build from scratch and hope that we got it right. So we focus entirely on the actual desktop and laptop client.
We focused our testing on the national ID cards, but if anything, the mobile voting appears to be a more lax security model than the traditional smart cards.
But the source code is not available for that, which means we can't provide the full analysis. But with the smartphone app for verification, we were able to analyze.
So one of the attacks we implemented, which we call bad verify, is one where we assume that there's malware running on the voter's computer. and that a malicious version of the verification app has been installed. And the way it works is when the voter clicks on the candidate and has it submitted to the server, the malware changes the vote before it's sent off. So even though you selected candidate A, it actually sent candidate B. But when you go to verify, if you had the normal verification app, it would show that something was wrong. But with the malicious verification app, it looks in the QR code, it encodes information of who you selected, and so it just shows who you selected, even though that is not what is stored on the server.
So the whole assumption behind the verification app is that your smartphone and your computer are two totally separate channels. But that's just not reality in modern life. Your phone and your computer, they're talking to each other all the time. Anytime you buy something in the App Store on your computer, it shows up on your phone and vice versa. You're syncing your mail and everything else. And what this means is that if one of these is compromised, the other one can easily be compromised too. And there are many different modes that we've seen that attackers can use to exploit that. In that case, what it means is that the smartphone verification app provides a speed bump to an attacker, but that's about it. It's not by any means a strong or foolproof mode of ensuring the integrity of the vote.
Actually, the false verification attack in the banking fraud is already out in the wild and has been seen 2 years ago. So the same model that you get a false identification, false balance of your own account because the system is lying to you, in the malware in your computer is lying to you, that's already out in the wild. So the model is existing and real.
How do you respond to those guys who say that, hey, you come from the States, you know nothing about the Estonian e-voting, we have something special, beautiful and unique here, and you're envious of us, because there are, newspaper articles, I don't know, Washington Post or somewhere. Soon the United States also will apply the e-voting system in the States. How do you respond to that?
Well, frankly, that's exactly why we were so interested in studying the Estonian system. I've wondered myself as a professor, as a researcher in this field, how it was that Estonia was accomplishing a secure internet voting system when people everywhere else around the world were concluding that this was very difficult or impossible. So that's why we wanted to study the system so extensively. But now we've spent the last period of time extensively going through every line of source code, every minute of video, reverse engineering the voting client app and taking it apart, reproducing all of this in our laboratory. Now we feel like we have a very good understanding, a complete understanding of the Estonian voting system. And unfortunately, what the conclusion we came to is that really the security is a house of cards, that there is no principled foundation to the security of this system, and that in a modern world where state-level attackers are a real threat, it's extremely vulnerable.
I think just to add, many countries like the UK are citing Estonia as an example for e-government and e-voting. So there is a real public need for us to better understand the Estonian system. But we have come here as independents, and I certainly didn't expect to see the problems that I found, and I was quite shocked by some of them. Typing in a root password, for example, which is the most powerful login for everyday use, which is very poor security practice. So we came with open minds to see it because we think the system is being marketed internationally, and so we need to understand it. We have found things, and it's our duty as responsible researchers to explain what we found. Now, if we had waited until after the election, it would come out very bad, wouldn't it? So we knew about very bad problems in the system, but we waited for the election to happen. So we have come, and we are explaining that. It is down to Estonians to decide what to do with our findings. We are just sharing what we have learned.
Estonian e-voting enthusiasts, you wanted to say something?
I want to say one thing about Estonia did a number of things great. One of the great things was to publish the source code, because it enabled us quicker to get down to this bottom of this. However, don't make a misconclusion that if the publishing would have made, a non-publishing would have made it safer, because any state attacker would have reverse engineered anyway. It just made, as independent researchers, for our job easier, but it didn't. That's why proprietary source code is even, proprietary code and secret programs are even more dangerous, because it just adds an extra hump.
That's right. If the programs were secret, we can just assume that a serious foreign power could steal the secret source code and do the same things that we did. So this enables us, people who are not criminals, to assess the security, but even if it were contrary to fact, completely secret and obscure, it wouldn't stop attacks.
Okay, question here.
Yes. Estonian government relies heavily on the ID card, which, as far as we know, has not been compromised. Do I understand you correctly that you don't need to break the ID cards in order to compromise the actual system?
Yes, that's right. That's right. We were very interested in the way the ID card works and the way it's used, and we feel like the ID card is a very interesting, potentially very valuable piece of the government infrastructure here, but it is not sufficiently strong to prevent attacks on the voting system. We were able to just very easily bypass the protections from the ID card when we created our attacks.
You have to remember that in a commerce, if there is something wrong, you can always go back and fix the problem. If somebody has used your credentials and make a purchase in your name and you prove it's a fraud, money will be returned to you. That is the thing which you cannot do in a voting, because you have to have the complete anonymity of the vote. You cannot do this kind of checks in the after the fact manner. So that's why you have to separate what are the security requirements for voting from what is the security requirements for e-commerce. They are very, very different requirements.
I think it's also important to recognise that the way that we have heard the ID card mentioned is that it's only with the user present that it works, and that's a key security measure. But what the attack shows is that actually malware can listen to the PIN codes and use the ID card when the user, the citizen, isn't present. And we also had that confirmed when we visited the data center. We saw lots of ID cards hanging out of servers there. So they were being used remotely in some way or another. So it's clear to us that while the ID card infrastructure is a positive development compared to countries with nothing, it still has the ability to be used remotely without the citizens' knowledge. And I don't think most citizens here are aware of that factor.
Yeah, the ID card system seems like a great idea, but it doesn't help protect the voting system. That's the bottom line.
Question?
Honorable Tallinn EU office. If I do predict some headlines online, tomorrow's papers, it will be no proof about the violation of previous elections where given. Something like it. In Estonia, it would be a general approach. And my question is, would you consider the not laboratory test only, but live check of the system?
We do not.
Oncoming elections.
We do not claim and are not claiming that any previous election has been rigged. There's not evidence to allow us to establish that hypothesis. There's also not sufficient evidence to refute that hypothesis. What we are concerned about is the integrity of future elections, including the European Parliament election that's about to start. And we're alarmed by the risks that show that these elections could be compromised or disrupted. They could even be compromised in ways that nobody would tell they were compromised. And this is why we feel the need to take these findings public now.
I think that's very important, is that what these attacks highlight, and attacks that have been demonstrated in election systems around the world in our previous work, is it's the undetectable nature of it as well. I mean, it's one thing if the system throws up a red alert and you can say, stop everything, we know there's a problem. Actually, why would a smart attacker do that? And what we're able to demonstrate here, as with every other voting system we've looked at, is that you can do undetectable attacks. And that's by far the worst thing. So everyone thinks the result is okay, but it could be the wrong person given the power. So that's the challenge. And of course, we would not want to be in a situation where we were attacking live systems, because then that would be a criminal act undermining a live election system. So that's why this lab approach was used. We've demonstrated the flaws are there, and we are very clear those flaws cannot be quickly fixed.
But you attacked live system in UK?
No.
Too?
No. Never.
No, no.
We've never, well, I've certainly never attacked a live system. We've used the systems that are used for a real election, but not in a real election circumstance.
That's right. Or the Washington, D.C. example, maybe that's what you're thinking of, where we successfully compromised the actual servers for the internet voting system that Washington, D.C. was preparing to use, but during a mock election before the real election, when the public was invited to come in and try to demonstrate attacks. So they're very strict legal and ethical bright lines that we of course can't cross as responsible researchers. But the best way that we do have to study the integrity of the system is to to run our own mock election on our copy of the system and attack that. And that's what we've done here. We've successfully attacked our own mock election in our laboratory. That's made using the same software and the same procedures that are used here in Estonia, that were used in the 2013 election.
I think you cannot overstate the importance of ethics. Everything done is done with a legal framework, an ethical matter, and responsible matter.
One more question. Has the Estonian government proposed to you, or have you proposed to them a possibility of making a mock election and also trying to prove what you proved on the actual system, not on the system you built?
This is our first contact with, this is our announcement of the results. We'd be very interested in having further conversations with the Estonian government, but I think the proof is well established now to within the credibility of scientific research that these problems are real problems. We are posting online today detailed analysis of the system, together with video showing the complete process we went through to attack the servers. These processes we feel established beyond any doubt the vulnerabilities that we're claiming.
To ensure fairness, we've informed everyone at the same time, which was Saturday. So we've informed the media, we've informed the National Elections Committee, government, academics in Estonia, all contact simultaneously. No one in Estonia has had advance notice of this. If the National Election Committee or anyone else wishes to speak to us about this, we're very happy to do so.
So how long will you stay in Estonia? So how much time do you have for this discussion and maybe as a mock exercise?
Well, I think some of us can stay and be available for practically as long as necessary.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming, everyone. And, if you would like to arrange an interview or further meetings, I'm happy to do that. Thank you.